The Vow of Ash, a fantasy romance novel. The kingdom of Vile Dorath sits between two dying powers, the crumbling throne of Embers, a human dynasty held together by blood oaths and political marriages, and the Sylvain, an ancient race of near-immortal beings who have governed the deep forests and mountain ranges for millennia. For 300 years, both have maintained an uneasy peace through a single covenant, the Vow of Ash. A binding treaty sealed not in ink, but in the literal blood of the ruling sovereign on each side, burned into a living tree at the border. The Vow of Ash is unbreakable, or so it was believed. When the vow's tree is found dead, murdered, by someone who understands its magic, both sides accuse the other. War looms for the first time in 3 centuries. To prevent it, an ancient clause in the original covenant is invoked, a hostage exchange, where one noble of each bloodline must live among the enemy until the truth is uncovered. Princess Saoirse of the Throne of Embers, the king's illegitimate daughter, brilliant, politically invisible, and hiding a dangerous secret about her own nature, is sent to the Sylvain as the human hostage. Erevan Ashmarked, the Sylvain general who has spent decades suppressing everything soft in himself, is assigned as her warden. Neither of them is who they appear to be, and the one who killed the vow's tree is already watching them both. Chapter 1. The Dead Tree. The tree had been alive 3 days ago. Saoirse knew this because she had crossed the border herself, 3 days ago, on her way back from the eastern salt markets. She had seen it through the carriage window, the great pale sentinel at the edge of the thornwood, enormous and silver-barked, its leaves the color of hammered copper even in the cold. She had looked at it the way she always did, with a feeling she had no name for, a kind of low-frequency recognition, like hearing a song and knowing the melody before the words arrive. Now its bark was black. Its branches hung like broken arms. Every leaf had fallen, not scattered by wind but dropped in a perfect circle around its base, as though even in dying it had tried to be precise. The king stood 10 feet from it and would not go closer. Saoirse stood behind him with the rest of the court and watched his shoulders. She had learned to read her father this way, from the back, from a distance, never permitted close enough to see his face when something mattered. His shoulders said, afraid. His shoulders said, calculating. His shoulders said, this changes everything, and I intend to survive it. The Sylvain did this, said Lord Caden. Saoirse's half-brother had positioned himself at the king's right side as he always did, close and luminous, the picture of a crown prince, tall, golden-haired, grieving at exactly the right volume. The vow is broken on their side. We should mobilize the Eastern. We should not, Saoirse said. Caden looked at her. It was the look he reserved exclusively for her, tolerant, mildly contemptuous, with a thin layer of wariness underneath that he believed she couldn't see. No one addressed you, Saoirse. The tree was alive 3 days ago, she said, to her father's back rather than her brother's face. I passed it on the Thornwood Road. If the Sylvain had broken the vow, we would have felt it. Every signatory bloodline feels a covenant fracture. When has there been a report of pain? Bleeds, fever, anything? Silence. The kind of silence that meant she was right and no one wanted to say so. She has a point, murmured Lord Advisor Pethan, from somewhere in the cluster of bodies behind her. He was 70 years old and had outlasted 4 royal favorites by being quietly correct about things. She has a point, the king said, finally. His voice was flat and measured. He still had not turned around. Someone killed the tree. Someone who understood the vow's binding. Someone who knew that killing it slowly, over days, rather than one violent act, would prevent both sides from feeling it break. Saoirse felt the cold come up through her boots from the frozen ground. She had not thought of it that way. She thought of it that way now. Slow, deliberate, someone who wanted both sides to blame each other. The Sylvain delegation arrives at sunset, the king continued. He turned, then, looked at his assembled court. Looked, briefly, at Saoirse, that particular look, the one that reminded her she was an asset before she was a daughter. We will invoke the emergency clause. The hostage exchange. The court erupted. Saoirse did not. She was already thinking about who stood to gain if Vile Dorath went to war. She was already making a list. She did not yet know her name was already on someone else's. The Sylvain delegation arrived exactly at sunset. There were 7 of them. Saoirse had never seen a Sylvain up close, few humans had, outside the border towns, and she found herself cataloguing them with the same methodical attention she gave everything she was not supposed to look at too directly. They were tall, not uniformly. There was variation the way there was variation in any people, but tall in a way that felt architectural rather than biological, as though height in their world was structural, was necessary. Their coloring ranged through the silver pale spectrum. They moved with a particular economy, no motion wasted, like people who had learned long ago that excess was a form of announcement. Their leader stood slightly apart, not forward, apart, as though he had decided the precise amount of distance at which he wished to be read and had placed himself there deliberately. He was in military dress, dark gray with silver hardware at the throat and cuffs, bearing no ornamentation except the scar she could see at his collarbone where the high collar ended. It was stark against his skin. Old. The ash mark, she realized. She had read about it. Ash marked. The title, not a name. The mark of someone who had touched the vow tree. His eyes, when they found her in the crowd, were an unsettling color, gray-green, or green-gray. She couldn't fix it, and they moved past her after exactly 1 second with the brisk efficiency of someone cataloging a room's occupants and finding nothing that required additional attention. She had spent 24 years being looked past. She was very good at not minding it. She minded this, specifically. She was not sure why. The negotiations took 3 hours and accomplished nothing except the formal invocation of the hostage clause, which everyone in both delegations had already decided before they sat down. Saoirse watched from her assigned seat at the far end of the table, present because her blood technically qualified her for the exchange, invisible because no one thought they'd actually use her. She watched her father not look at her. She watched Caden not look at her. She watched the Sylvain general, Erevan. She gleaned from the formal introductions, General Erevan ash-marked of the Thornwood border. She watched him look at the treaty documents with the focused intensity of a man searching for a way out that he suspected did not exist. When her name was proposed for the exchange, she heard it the way you hear something in a dream, slightly delayed, arriving a half-second after the reality. Princess Saoirse, 3rd of name, of the Ember bloodline. Her father said it, himself. He didn't let Caden say it, didn't let Pethan say it. He said it with his eyes on the treaty and his voice completely level, and she thought, he decided this before I crossed the border 3 days ago. He decided this before the tree died. The Sylvain general looked up from the documents. He looked at her, not past her, at her. 1 second. 2. Something moved through those shifting gray-green eyes that she couldn't read. Not surprise, not satisfaction, something more careful than either of those, and then he said, to his counterparts rather than to her. Accepted. Saoirse looked at her father. He was already looking away. There it is, asterisk she thought. There's the thing I was always going to be useful for. She folded her hands in her lap and kept her face perfectly empty, and behind her eyes she began, quietly, furiously, to plan. She was given 4 hours to pack. Maren wept. Saoirse did not weep, but she held Maren's face in her hands for a long moment and memorized it with the deliberateness of someone who suspects they are memorizing things for the last time. You'll send word, Maren said. It was not a question. If I can. Saoirse kissed her forehead. If I can't, it doesn't mean what you'll worry it means. She packed light, practical clothes. Her books, 3 of them, chosen carefully, one on Sylvain Covenant law, one a history of the border territories written from the Sylvain side, and one a small volume of poetry she had owned since she was 9 years old and refused to be parted from on principle. A knife she had carried for 6 years and never once needed to use. The small amber pendant her mother had left her, which she wore inside her collar, against her sternum, where no one could see it. She stood at her window for 60 seconds looking at the Ember Throne's torchlit courtyards. She had been born in this building and had been lonely in it every day of her life, and still, staring at it now, she felt the specific terror of losing the cage for the unknown of a different one. Then she turned away from the window, picked up her bag, and went to meet her warden. He was waiting in the outer courtyard, mounted, with the 6 other Sylvain and 2 human escort guards. He wore a traveling cloak now, dark and practical, the Sylvain ash mark visible above the collar as it had been before. He was looking at the gate. Saoirse walked to the spare horse that had been prepared for her, checked the saddle with the quick efficient attention of someone who'd been thrown before and learned from it, and mounted. The general's eyes moved to her. "You checked your own tack," he said. "I prefer not to fall off horses," she said. "Our grooms are not incompetent." "I didn't say they were. I said I prefer." She settled into the saddle and looked at him directly, because she was about to spend an unknown number of months in his power, and she had decided, in the 4 hours since her father had sold her into this, that the only thing she could control was how she entered it. "I am Saoirse, not the princess, not the human, not the hostage." Saoirse, something moved through his eyes, that careful, unreadable thing again. "You'll be called what protocol requires in formal contexts," he said. "In informal ones." A pause, very small. "In informal ones," he said, "I'll bear it in mind." She nodded. He looked away first, back to the gate, back to the road that led north and east into the Thornwood and the territory she had only ever read about. His jaw was set. His posture was absolute. He was not pleased about this, she realized. Not her specifically, or perhaps her specifically, she didn't know yet, but this arrangement, this entire situation, had not gone the way he intended. Good, she thought. We have that in common. The gate opened. She rode through it without looking back at the Ember Throne. Behind her, she heard Caden's voice carry across the courtyard, saying something to someone, laughing at something, already moving on. She thought, "I am going to find out who killed that tree." She thought, "And when I do, I think it's going to change everything about who I thought my enemies were." She did not yet know how precisely right she was. The Thornwood closed over them like a held breath. End of chapter 1.